Back to Ghost. All the way across forecheck. In front. They score! Patrick tips it home. It's a 4-3 hockey game as the kid seems to be enjoying it on the top power play unit. 3-point game for Patrick.
Hey everybody, it's Isaiah. Just reminding you that FlyersNittyGritty.com and the O&B Puckcast are brought to you by Summit Public Adjusters. Hey, do you have damage to your home? Not sure who to call? We suggest that you call Summit Public Adjusters before your insurance company. Dealing with your insurance company can be very stressful. Let Summit take the stress out of the claims process. From storm damage to your roof, to toilet overflows, to broken pipes and fires, Summit gets you the most money for your repairs. So next time Mother Nature leaves you in need of repairs, call Summit Public Adjusters at 215-752-0560 or visit summitpublicadjusters.com. Again, Summit Public Adjusters, you can reach them at 215-752-0560 or just visit Summit with 1T, publicadjusters.com. Licensed in PA and New Jersey.
And we are back. It's Isaiah, and we have an O&B Puckcast special. It's Flyers 5x5, Volume 3. And with us tonight is this guy is one of the original guests from the very beginning of the O&B Puckcast, and he's with FlyerFaceoffs.com. Did I get that right, Kevin Fortier?
Yep, that's the website, and it's a real pleasure to be back on with you. I've been occasional guest going back for quite a while now with your show. It's always been a lot of fun.
Yeah, go back to 2017 and back when we had a little hope back in the hack years, and now we have been red-pilled or something like that, and we realized that this team has basically I'm going to try and keep this family friendly and say wasting some time. And this is put up or shut up year for Chuck Fletcher. So tonight what we're going to do, folks, is we are going to essentially take 5 topics, do at least 5 minutes. We usually do a little more, and get you off on the road with the latest information that pertains to the Philadelphia Flyers and maybe some NHL playoff in here if we got some time. So, Kevin, you just wrote a really fine article on FlyerFaceoffs.com about Phil Myers and why he should remain a Flyer. You made your case with statistics, some eye test observations, and why don't you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, one of the things that started to happen about halfway through the season was I started to just seeing a lot of negativity directed towards Phil Myers' way on on Flyers Twitter. It was coming up a lot. Then you started to see it sporadically in some articles on various blogs, and even started seeing some mentions on the Philly Inquirer site. And I've been a huge fan of Myers, advocate for him ever since the Flyers signed him when off of that camp invite. So it was frustrating because he was just getting so much blame for everything, and people were just saying that he was the worst guy they have on the blue line. And I was looking at the stats and like you said with the eye test and saying, yeah, he's made some, he's made mistakes out there, He's obviously not playing up to, his potential, but nobody on the Flyers D was really playing consistent hockey, playing well, playing up to their potential. Other than maybe Justin Braun, and there isn't a lot of, upside potential there anymore. So I wanted to, I started thinking about it. I was doing battle with people, going back and forth and throwing up some charts and things as this was going on. But I knew, I was thinking in the back of my mind that when we got to the end of the season, I wanted to really dig into this and see, was I just completely off, or was I right that he just, was getting a lot of the negativity, and that was being, somewhat, misplaced, and he was just getting scapegoated for that. And the fact that he was paired with Sanheim most of the time, and I wasn't seeing, Sanheim playing all that brilliantly either. And then this goes kind of back into some of the selective accountability where, Sanheim wasn't a healthy scratch all season, whereas Phil Myers was especially in the second half was being a regular healthy scratch. Ghost was obviously being scratched. Ghost got waived, came back, played his ass off. So I wanted to look across the Flyers defense core and compare Myers to the rest of the guys. So, and what I did is I took all the numbers where applicable and did a 82 game pace run rate. So he would have a respectable 21 points. He did finish the season minus 10, but his D partner for most of the time, Sanheim, was minus 22. Sanheim would have had 22 points. Myers was more of a physical, less of a shot block guy, so their numbers are almost identically flipped here. So Sanheim had 72 hits, about 110 blocks. Myers 129 hits, 75 blocks. That's one thing where he can definitely improve, and I think he needs to improve. Is if he could improve in shot blocking, that might make the coaching staff a little bit more, give him more of a chance on the penalty kill, seeing that he's a little bit more, reliably defensively, being able to do that. And then when you look across, he was only second behind Robert Hagen in the total number of hits, which, again, people kind of go back and forth on, because if you're hitting, you obviously don't have the puck, but from a defensive perspective, it's a little bit different. It's not quite the same as that statement is on the forwards. One thing that did surprise me, he had the second best Corsi rating among all the Flyers defense, and he was only a tenth of a point behind Sanheim. Myers had a Corsi of 54%, which is pretty solid. The Provorov was 50.6, Ghost was at 52, Haig was 52, Braun 51. He and Sanheim were the only guys that had positive Corsi relative numbers. So he was at basically 2, Myers or Sanheim was at 3. So by definition, it says they're making the guys around them a little bit better when they're on the ice. From a turnover to takeover ratio, Myers actually had the best of all the defensemen. His ratio, he had 1.4 turnovers for every takeaway. He had 27 turnovers and 19 takeaways. Sanheim and Ghost were both about 2.5. Provorov, by comparison, was 11.2. He was fine. Goals for per 60, 2.6. Provorov and Ghost both had 3.1, and then he was third place there. Goals against per 60, he definitely needs to work on. That was his weak area. He and Sanheim were both about 3.5. But one stat that I did pull from this skater comparison tool that I like to use, which unfortunately didn't have 2021 data updated yet, but looking back over a 3-year span, so basically covering the 3 seasons that Myers played in the NHL so far, when it came to zone entry defense per 60, Myers ranked in the 87th percentile among defensemen. So he did a good job on defending the opposing team coming into in what they what they call a controlled zone entry into the Flyers defensive zone. Provy was 68 percentile, Ghost was 76 percentile. The rest were at below 50%. So comparing him across the Flyers defense, he had a pretty solid season. Now, again, everybody kind of underperformed. I'm not saying that he didn't have problems, that, he didn't make some crucial mistakes and some badly timed goals. But across the board, looking at the entire defense core, like I said, a respectable points number, solid hits, had the second best Corsi rating, and the turnovers to takeaway.
All right,
he had a pretty good year.
Yeah, let me interject here. The thing is that when you watch Phil Myers, one thing that seems clear is he doesn't have a knack for thinking the game as well as a player like Sanheim. For all of Sanheim and his deficits, that is something when you see him make a mistake, the same kind of mistake repeatedly, it makes you wonder, despite being as toolsy as any Flyer defenseman, does he have a ceiling? Is he more or less kind of like a 4-5 defenseman? In other words, if he had a really smart partner on a second pair, like maybe an Alex Martinez, they're just throwing that name out there, then you could live with some of his mistakes, and he would learn and grow from a smart decision maker who has a lot of experience. Or is he kind of like a Rasmus Ristolainen, who's like a disaster waiting to happen, and he'll never develop?
That's an interesting point, and that is a concern, and it was somewhat of a surprise because I watched a fair amount of Myers in juniors after obviously after he got signed by the Flyers, and he seemed to be he wasn't making those kind of mental mistakes, and it seemed like he was thinking the game a lot better. When he made the Canadian team and he was playing on the top pair before he got that cheap shot head, hit from Luke Cunnin, he wasn't making those kind of mistakes. And then he came in, he played well in, with the Phantoms. He had some injury issues off and on. And last year, it seemed like he wasn't doing that last year. So I don't know what was going on this year from that perspective, but that's a legit point, and hopefully that's something that with the off season and coming back, maybe he'll be in a better place mentally, and he won't make that those same mistakes like he was this year.
Yeah. It would seem that with what's going on with the Flyers defense, they're obviously going to add a significant player on the top pair to play with Ivan Provorov, you would think. But there might be another addition. There might be a sense of urgency with Giroux in his last year, with Couturier deciding whether or not he even wants to be here. I mean, he came in 2011. There's been a lot of losing. It's been the worst era of hockey in Flyers history. And in terms of just basically going nowhere. That's just not who the Flyers have been. So I would think that one of Sanheim and Myers might be used as a trade chip to bring in one of those two defensemen. And while I believe that Phil Myers has all the attributes you're talking about, I think there's a sense of urgency that may override some of the concern that if they give up on Myers too soon, they may regret it.
Yeah, and in the roster that I put together out on Cap Friendly, I assumed that Sanheim was moved. I actually had him moved in the package to bring in Ehlers from Winnipeg. I agree. I think one of them is going to be gone. Obviously, I'm leaning more towards keeping Myers because he's the only young right-hand D in the system right now that is in the NHL or even within a couple years of making it to the NHL. Whereas you've got York coming up, you got Zamula down there, who's on the Phantoms, and he could potentially be a call up in the second half of next season. I think York is going to make a strong case to make the team coming out of camp, barring injury or falling on his face for some unforeseen reason. So I think Sanheim is a little bit more expendable just because they have more options on the left. But yeah, I agree. I actually support looking at that because I think they do need to bring someone that has more offensive potential into the top six to help where the Flyers go into these ruts where they just completely forget how to score goals.
Yeah. Hey, let's go into the next question with you. Some news today, or actually yesterday, and then topped even further. Let's unpack that. Doug Hamilton can begin negotiations with other teams. He has permission from his current club, the Carolina Hurricanes. So they're trying to gauge the market, but obviously they're open to trading him, and that might say some things. So you immediately, as a Flyer fan, you know that Doug Hamilton passes the eye test. He passes the stats test. He maybe should have been a Flyer from day one. We can still argue that. But it's 2021. And then we hear that, well, according to Elliot Friedman on his 31 Thoughts podcast, that Dougie Hamilton, while he would seem to be an automatic for the Flyers, is not necessarily on the top of their list. They're looking more at somebody like Seth Jones or somebody else. And the comment was kind of left there. So what's your feeling? Do you think that could be a little bit of, false intelligence thrown out there, given the marketplace of players that the Flyers could be choosing from? What are you thinking?
Yeah, I certainly think that's a possibility. Obviously, I've been a huge fan of Hamilton, and I was one of the people that wanted him back in the draft. He seems to be the top defensive prospect out there for the teams to be targeting in the offseason. And it's interesting because I had just finished reading Elliot's article yesterday or last night where he listed and ranked the teams that were going to be targeting him, and the Flyers were right there at that top tier. And he was rattling off a lot of the stats as to why Hamilton is the best defensive target out there in the off season. Like for the last 4 years, he leads all defensemen in goals. He rattled off a bunch of different stats. So it certainly could be, although not really. I mean, this is only Fletcher's second year, not really knowing him that well. Maybe he really, for whatever reason, wants to look somewhere else. Maybe he thinks it's going to cost too much to bring Hamilton, to sign him and to, give up something, of significant value to get the rights to even talk to him to begin with, and then, end up, paying him like $9 million for 7 or 8 years or something like that. So maybe he's looking at a trade with Columbus to get, Seth Jones, or the other name I saw mentioned was Ristolainen, which is interesting. And I know we're going to talk about Reinhart coming, later on in the discussion. But one of the things I posted yesterday, or the day before, I can't remember, was I'd be kind of excited if they targeted Buffalo and brought over Ristolainen and Reinhart in a package. So who knows?
Rasmus Ristolainen, talk about a number 4 or 5 defenseman. That's him. And him on a first pair with Ivan Provorov would be an unmitigated disaster.
Really? You think so?
Well, he can't play. He literally has all the tools in the world, but he has no brain for hockey. He was rushed. He was not brought along properly. Gee, how many Buffalo defensemen were rushed? I mean, it's just one after the other. I mean, Tyler Myers never really hit a ceiling he could have, in my opinion. Again, it's all my opinion. Erasmus Ristolainen. They even had another, he was at Atlanta Thrasher Bogosian's another guy they rushed into the league. Luke Shen, as opposed to somebody like Pietrangelo. Now, Pietrangelo is an interesting name relative to this conversation because I think Hamilton will get Pietrangelo type contract numbers in the range of 9.5. Yeah. But Pietrangelo back in 2008 when he was drafted, he wasn't ready like Drew Doughty was ready. They took a lot of time with him. So, and I feel the same way about Cam York. Just give him more time. Let him play a little bit at the pro level. Let him make his mistakes. And I think they learned that a little bit with Carter Hart. But I digress. Getting back to these defensemen, Ristolainen doesn't think the game very well. He is a stats nightmare, but I can see why they like him, but not to play with Provorov. That would be a mistake-prone top pair and one of the worst top pairs in the league. There's no way. I wouldn't mind having them on a team, okay, on a second pair with a really smart veteran, and I don't know what that guy is, Sanheim. So to me, It's about the fit. It's about who these pairings are, who they're going to play with. And that's the same thing with Provorov. I think when you look at Seth Jones, he's like, and this is something that Allison Lucan was talking about in a conversation she had with Charlie O'Connor on The Athletic. And I just had already said on Twitter that I look at Jones as a very similar player, maybe a better version of Ivan Provorov. So two of those guys, maybe not the greatest decision makers, definitely a physical force, someone you have to account for, and someone the forwards are really concerned about. But, if the Flyers are doubling down on Seth Jones, that maybe part of that deal is to bring in one of their other needs, somebody like Eunice Korpisalo as a backup goalie who's kind of like a 1A with Carter Hart. So if Carter Hart has some struggles and needs some coaching like he did this past season, then you have a guy like Korpisalo who's carried the mail a little bit. That could be like a mitigating factor,
Are the Flyers going to have the kind of money that Korpisalo is he a free agent or where is he? He's got one more year at 2.8. All right, well that would work. He's definitely going to get paid more than that after next year, but I was going to say Oliver Bjorkstrand is somebody that I've liked for a while. If they did a bigger package with Columbus to get Seth Jones, I would love to see Oliver Bjorkstrand come over and be, in the top six on the, and he can play either wing.
Well, yeah, maybe. But I mean, now you're talking about a deal that's going to have like Konecny, Travis Sanheim, and maybe some other pieces like Bobby Brink, maybe even Morgan Frost. Morgan Frost hasn't played in a dog's age, and they need centers. And we don't know what his future is with the Flyers. So, I mean, that could be a pretty big deal between those two clubs. Pretty clear that Columbus, if they are willing to move on or feel like they have to move on from Seth Jones, clearly are in rebuild mode. So that would be an expensive package. So let me just run some other names by you.
Okay.
Ryan Ellis to me would seem perfect, except for the age, but still at 30 years of age, Chemo came over at 32, Pronger at 35. It's not the end of the world if the Flyers feel like Couturier's window is what it is, and they're going to sign him at age 30. So, hey, why not? Defensemen age better than forwards. And he's a real steady Eddie. He gets hurt a lot. That's what I
was going to say. He seems to get hurt a lot. But, I've always liked Ryan Ellis.
He's like 5.25. His number allows them, or it's 6.25, allows them to bring in another defenseman as opposed to paying big bucks for – I mean, they're not going to trade for Seth Jones without getting some kind of guarantee that he's going to re-up with them. You don't make that kind of commitment. So – Adam Larson is another name. Not a lot of offense, but very steady defensively, nice rebound. And he's about, 28 or so. And, hasn't always had the big minutes, but he's a good player.
Yeah, he's a solid he's a real good defensive defenseman. But like you said, he's certainly not going to be putting up any numbers on that top pair. The other guy from Edmonton who I really like and was interested in before was Tyson Barrie. Now he had an insane season. I mean, he had a 70-point pace this past season. So he's a free agent, so he's gonna be looking to get a major payday, and he took a huge pay cut to play that 1 year in Edmonton. He's somebody that I would like.
Yeah, I don't know if he's. I don't know. To me, he's like a better version of Ghost. I don't know if I really trust him as a long-term partner for Provy. We'll have to see. There are names out there. The Flyers are going to have choices, and then on the second tier, then you have players like David Savard, who I wouldn't mind on the second pair with a Sanheim if he's still here, or possibly, like I mentioned, Ristolainen. Although, boy, he will frustrate you. You will look at him and just say, "Looks like Tarzan, plays like Jane." But anyway.
Well, he's a physical beast.
Yeah. I know. He
killed the Flyers forwards.
But you don't win with guys like that. They make too many mistakes. They play against top lines and they get crushed. That's the killer. Probably.
Yeah, but he's also been on the worst team in hockey since he's been there. They've been at the bottom of the basement.
He's awful, Kevin. He's got all the tools. He just doesn't think the game very well. I can guarantee you'll love him 1 minute and then you'll say, "Oh my God, we're stuck with this guy, and this is the best we have." Nah. A second pair, if we get a guy like Ellis, I guess I could live with that in the right deal if we're getting maybe some other players we're going to talk about later. But I want to move on because I want to hit an intangible that I think is pretty much in play here, because we're going to talk about, we might as well kind of combine these two questions about Nolan Patrick, and people are kind of hanging on to the hope that, wow, it was a second overall pick and what was it, 2017? And we can't let him go because his value could never be lower. And I'm thinking, he wasn't picked by Chuck Fletcher. And there is something going on with this team, And I've said on several occasions, and not to sound like a broken record, but, if you look at 19, and where they went 32 out of 82 games, down 2-0. And then last year, they were beaten by 4 more goals 9 times out of 56 games, including the 9-0 and 8-3 pastings at the hand of the Rangers. There's just something fundamentally broken about this team. I mean, what is their identity? Who are they? They need to forge that. And I guess combining these two topics of Nolan Patrick, I don't really care at this point what his value is and what his potential is, because I haven't seen Bupkis in 3 years. I saw more in 3 games of Wade Allison in terms of desire, just willingness to compete, than I did from Nolan Patrick in 3 years. We saw a flash here, a flash there, a couple power play goals against the Islanders. We did a couple show intros with those goals. But I think the culture and this identity and who they are is a big issue that needs to be reflected on who they keep and who they let go of. Even if you're worried about value, is value that important when you're talking about a sense of urgency, as Giroux might be up and maybe in his last year here, who knows? And Couturier is deciding, are we ever going to win? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I hear you. And, we've talked for a couple of years now, what is the Flyers' identity? What is their system? How do they play? When you look at teams like Vegas and Colorado and Tampa and the Islanders and all, the other contending teams, what their system is, their style of play. And the Flyers, it seems like they just go out there and just whatever happens, happens. and it's so frustrating. And in this year, everything seemed to just fail across the board. Sam Carchidi had a chart in an article after the end of the season comparing year-to-year stats, and literally every single stat across the board got worse year over year. How are they still, in the basement of the penalty kill? They had, last year they did better, but now they're right back into the basement again. The power play with all the talent, how can they not do any better? And they never adjust either. That's the thing. When I was on with Yariv last week, we were talking about that. Their power play hasn't changed in any way visibly since like 2012. They just and the penalty kill, they're timid out there. They just collapse and they don't do anything. They don't attack. They haven't been a threat to score a shorthanded goal in like 7 or 8 years now. And offensively, so they get the puck, they're in the defensive end, they get the puck from somebody, then the defense just freezes and they stand there and wait for somebody to forecheck on them. And then they, heave the puck off the boards and pray that something good happens. They never carry the puck into the offensive zone with any momentum. So, yeah, it's really problematic.
And it's not only that; it's when you had the low pointer, nadir of the season, when you have Oscar Lindblom fighting to show some kind of spirit.
Yeah.
And it was a big deal that Sam Moran went out there and got a goal, but they're looking for Sam to keep people honest, to keep from running their team. We've got 4 teams that are left in the playoffs that are just running each other crazy, and the Flyers the Flyers wouldn't have any pushback. You couldn't even have Moran out there because he's not a good enough player. I don't know if he ever really will recover some of that lateral quickness that he didn't have a lot of, before he got hurt. So you got to kind of rebuild this team. I remember a couple, right before the bubble, the playoffs, they interviewed an executive about the playoffs and the Flyers, and they asked him about the team, and he said, the Flyers can get under their skin, they get rattled. And I was thinking, this is after that period where they went on a roll, and of course we had the pandemic. But I was thinking, well, that's the old Flyers before Chuck made his additions of Hayes and Niskanen, and Pitlick was showing a little bit of jam and all that. But you know what? They kind of turned back into that team. And then we heard from Justin Braun last year about he's never seen a team fall apart like this before. And of course, we're talking about when they're getting waxed in all these games. They have got to address this with personnel that have won something, that know how to hold it together. They need pros back there. They need good decision makers, guys that if they're going to be physical, they have to know when to be physical. They can't be trying to fight somebody and get a penalty like Moran did against the Islanders. I mean, you can't have that. It is time for them to brush that crap aside and start to forge an identity. Because when AV says be an effing Flyer, I don't even know what that means. I know what it meant up until 2010, but 2011, 2012. Okay, after that, it's over. There are no Flyers right now. They're just, I don't know what they are, and that is an area they have to address. So, I don't know.
Well, and that is getting back into the discussion about, Dougie Hamilton or whoever else. When, other than Hayes, there hasn't been a big name free agent that's come to the Flyers in at least the last 10 years. And with making the playoffs every other year and going into last summer not having won a playoff series since 2012, there is no more draw. It's not the same thing to be a Flyer as it used to be. The guys used to want to come here because the Flyers, the one thing you always knew was they were going to try to win. Snyder was going to make the deals. They were going for it now. And this team, you just don't know what's going to happen. And now it seems like they've already quit on AV after his, in his second year.
AV looked like he didn't want to be there at the end of the year.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, they don't have a good offseason. I might have said this on the last show. He looks like he's just going to be coaching to get fired. Because he didn't come here to put up with this crap. And in a way, I can't blame him. But I mean, you got to do your job. You sign a contract. But the Flyers, I mean, I think since Homer left, I think it's almost like I hate to say use this comparison, but the Flyers have been in lockdown since Hextall took over.
Yeah.
And that's what it feels like. The life has been sucked out of him, and he has to find a way to have a spark, a creative spark, to acquire some players that'll put some juice back into this bunch. And they need to be more intelligent and get out of this mindset of whining and complaining about calls. You know, guys like Voracek and Gostisbehere, God bless him for playing better after he got waived, but these are whiners and complainers. They're not winners, and something has to change. So that's kind of
the problem is,
yeah.
What if they can't get rid of Jake or JVR? Not much is going to change because there's not going to be any room to sign anybody anyway. Once they sign their free agents, their restricted free agents, and they sign a backup goalie, that's going to be about it. If they don't move at least one of those contracts,
I think the Flyers will find a way to move about $12 million out. They have to. It's that simple.
I hope so.
That's Ghost and one of Jake or JVR. Personally, if I'm Seattle, looking at the landscape, knowing JVR is going to give you a couple good years, you could go with that. If you think that Ghost could be the next Colin Miller for a couple years until you get some defensemen that are really good, you might want to go in that direction. But I think that they're going to clear about 12. They have to. Like I said, he will find a way. It might be very painful. You might see someone like Brink, Frost, Zamula headed out the door.
Yeah.
They can't trade York because they got Cole Caulfield scoring goals like there's no tomorrow, making the Flyers look stupid. But that we'll see. He's just flashing in the playoffs. But, boy, he is something else.
Yes, he is.
He is just – and he's smart. He doesn't have to be a tough guy. He's squat. He's built low to the ground. So he has some power. His stride is terrific. He's a sharpshooter. He's a terrific passer. He gets rid of the puck. He has dynamite hands. The only thing he lacks is size. You got to love the kid. He's got that smile. You know, you're going to hate him scoring against you. But in your heart, you know the Flyers really took a chance. And they weren't the only ones. They had two chances at him. They traded down, then they passed on him again when they chose York. I just hope York is at least a really, really steady Eddie top four defenseman. That's all I can say. I love the kid so far, but well, I'll tell you, the Flyers have needed what Cole Caulfield is giving Montreal right now for a long time. So
you would have thought after passing on to Brinkett that they would have smartened up.
I hear you there, but everybody passed on to Brinkett. They thought he can't skate. I mean, the thing is, his skating is adequate. His hockey sense is off the charts. But Cole Caulfield is like a speed demon out there. But let's move to the we all have a wish list of players that everybody's talking about. You mentioned them earlier. One of my under-the-radar players that I hope the Flyers get so they can finally put an end to this 3C, 2C problem that they have and get some insurance in case Couturier flies the coop is Sam Reinhart, who's been playing a lot of wing in Buffalo. Got a chance to play center last year. That's what he played in juniors, from what I understand. And he's a solid guy who never quits. But he apparently wants out of Buffalo. And if a Ristolainen scenario emerges, he would definitely have to be in a conversation for me to be interested.
Well, yeah, and we talked about that before. I mentioned that exact package. Reinhart would be great. He can play any position, but like you said, he would help solve that gap in the middle of the ice. He also scores a lot of points on the power play, which the Flyers need. And he's smart on the power play. He moves. He opens him. He creates positions for himself. He's a phenomenal passer. The Flyers are just too complacent on the power play. They slow passing. They don't move around a lot. It's so predictable. And he would just really add to the power play as well as at 5-on-5.
He's such a competitor too, in
Yep.
the worst doldrums you could imagine in that hellhole of hockey, which is a shame
Yeah.
for them. I mean, it is a great fan base. I mean, I go back to the Cup days when I had such respect for them. Even they would really terrorize the Flyers during the regular season with that French Connection line, and they had a lot of depth. They never had the goaltending that was good enough, and for years, and then you go to 99 when they went to the finals, and Hasek, boy, was he a thorn in the side during the Lindros era. And they were tough teams to play against, and then of course you had the latter day 2006. They definitely would have won the cup, but they were down there like I don't know. They were using 2 or 3 minor league defensemen when they played Carolina that year. So just Buffalo's a great hockey market, but they screwed it all up. But if we can take advantage of that, everybody talks a lot about Eichel. I'm a little bit worried about his neck. I don't know what kind of problem he has, what location is. If it's real high at C23, like I had a fusion, I got to be honest. That I think Gary Roberts had a C23 fusion and made it back, but that is rare. Sterling Sharp had to retire from football with that injury. Now, if it's down at 4.5, 5.6, then I'm open. But apparently, he wants a novel treatment, like a disc replacement. That is still relatively new, as we both know. We both have spine problems. So, I mean, I'd be more than fine with Sam Reinhart. Are there any other the radar players that people might not be talking about that you would be interested in?
Well, there was one idea that I floated, which was to do an offer sheet on Neil Pionk out of Winnipeg. He's a young, mobile right-hand defenseman. He had like a 49-point pace season this year. He's fast. He's a good passer. He can be out there on the power play as well. I think he would be a really good addition to the Flyers defense core. There's a lot of guys on Winnipeg that I really like, actually. I mean, I would just absolutely kill for, Connor or Ehlers. But I like Reinhart a lot too.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. He's a really good player. I'm going to give you one more. He's out on LTIR. I don't know how serious his injury is, but if the stars align that the Flyers get a less expensive player at that first pair, to get a guy like Ellis, and they wanted to go a little bigger in terms of name and quality. I've always been a big fan of Hampus Lindholm out in Anaheim. He's making 5.2 through next year, so he would be a UFA. That would be kind of dicey to get him for only 1 year if they thought that he would re-up. But then again, I don't know the nature of his injury. He's just another one of those guys I really like. I also wouldn't mind, and I still think it's a possibility, despite Kyle Dubas saying he'd never do it. Again, I am concerned about the center position going forward. The Flyers have not drafted centers very well recently, and that's organizationally been a strong suit for them. William Nylander is a guy I'd be interested in as well, coming off a really good playoff. But I think you have to look at the big picture out there. They need an alpha dog on defense. And, Morgan Riley's a nice player. He'd be somebody I'd be interested in and give up significant assets for, because he's got a dynamic element and his skill translates to the power play, which you mentioned earlier. And, there's a couple other players, but yeah.
He's very versatile. He's another guy that can play any of the forward positions, but he's solid as a centerman. Like you said, he's fast. He's dynamic, creating, the plays on the rush. He creates a lot of scoring chances. He's got a lot of quickness. He's another one that's a really good passer. He's a good skater. And, he's the only one that was scoring for Toronto in the playoffs this year. All their big guns. Well, I mean, obviously Tavares got hurt, but Matthews and Marner just did absolutely nothing.
Yeah, and the thing is that they're going to need they need a defenseman, so they would probably trade him straight up for somebody, perhaps. But maybe there's a three-way, or maybe they want some. Maybe they're going to go for Doug Hamilton, and I don't know. But Doug Hamilton seems like if there's a knock on Doug Hamilton, getting back to him, it's that he might not like a high-profile kind of hockey talent because he would be going to his fourth team, right?
Yeah.
He wasn't happy in Boston, goes to Calgary, then he's caught up in that trade with Lindholm coming to Calgary with some other players like Hannafin and so forth. And now here we are. Carolina would seem like an ideal market for him, but he if you're that good, why are you on your fourth team? And there are rumblings that he's kind of like not a bad guy, but he's just not. He likes to go to museums. He's just a different guy. It doesn't make him a bad player or not a team guy. But hockey ethos and culture is different in every town, and he might not fit. Who knows?
Yeah, I mean, Toronto has a lot of cap issues. They definitely have to make some moves to be able to fit Hamilton in. There was talk before about Sanheim being involved in a trade for Nylander. It would have taken more than just Sanheim, I think. But I mean, as far as unfortunately, the Flyers don't really have. You were talking like a big dog. They don't really have anybody that's physical to send Toronto's way. I mean, Toronto just got so pushed around by Montreal's giant defensemen and some of the their bigger forwards. I think they need a big, rugged, physical defenseman, and we just don't have one of those to send to them.
Unless you're talking about Provorov.
Yeah,
Provorov is the closest thing we have to that player, and I don't think that's going to happen. But we got a last word before we go, but I just wanted to remind people the O&B Puckcast and FlyersNittyGritty.com, our sponsor, is brought to you by Jim South Street, 400 South Street, 4 decades of the best cheesesteaks, hoagies, fries you'd ever want in the grandest Philadelphia tradition. South Philly, Center City, you name it. But Jim South Street's got to be on your bucket list. With or without, it doesn't matter. And remember, if you live down there and you can't get over, don't worry. They work with DoorDash so that delicious food will be coming right to your door. So remember, Jim's South Street, 400 South Street in Philadelphia, PA. And Kevin, why don't we wrap this up with a last word about the NHL playoffs, some impressions. And Kevin, one of the things you talked about it earlier, the physicality of all the 4 teams running at each other, competing at a level that we haven't seen a Flyer team be able to match. And I'm not even talking about the regular season. So that's supposedly a really poor observation. Fine. When I've seen the playoffs from the Flyers, they just couldn't keep up. And that's part of like that other layer that the Flyers need to add culturally. I mean, that is something that is coming through loud and clear besides the obvious talents that are still on display, as 4 teams are left.
Yeah, without question. You look at the teams that were really good but got knocked out. They had a lot of talent. They had speed, but they didn't have the physical aspect of the game. And when they went up against teams that played them really physically and had the bigger guys on back on the back end, or that fourth line like the Islanders or Vegas's fourth line, and they would just go out there and pound and hit those teams. They just if you don't have that complete team aspect, it just you're not going to succeed in a 7-game series, and it was really evident this year.
Yeah, it definitely was, and that's why you get the lopsided scores because the Flyers were losing at many different levels on the ice. They didn't have those intangibles in addition to not really being a team that's put together well. The pieces don't complement each other. You know, we've talked about repeatedly about, don't just collect talent. Put pieces together and build a team. So you need more shooters. You need guys that will do the grunt work on the PK, but you also need players that give them some creativity in special teams on the power play. So, like we've talked about before on our show, on our regular show, Chuck Fletcher has quite a task ahead of him this summer. Any last thoughts, Kevin?
To that point, yeah, he's really got a lot of work to do. He's got to make this team able to compete, and job number one is going to be clearing up cap space to make the additions that absolutely have to be made if the Flyers are going to put a break in this, make the playoffs every other season and don't really do well even if you make the playoffs, or have these disappointing losses where it seems like whenever they come up against a team that has a 10 or say Buffalo this year 18 game losing streak, it's always the Flyers that end up ending these streaks. They also ended New Jersey's 9-game losing streak.
Yeah,
they've got to have he's got to be able to ice a team that's going to be able to go out there and compete on a regular basis. And when certain guys aren't performing, know that you've got other lines or other D pairs that are going to pick up the slack, and that the team's not going to just collapse.
That's it right there. That's it. The compete level has got to be there. I know there were some special situations with Oscar. We've talked Nolan Patrick to death. I'm kind of tired of that scene for the reasons you just referred to. They need to get better in those areas right bleeping now. So,
yep.
Kevin, where can people find your work, catch you on social media, your coordinates?
You can follow me at KS Fortier, and you can also follow the site at Flyers Face Off on Twitter and FlyersFaceOffs.com. Don't ask me why that's plural, but it is.
Yeah, well, you want to get to the right place, that's for sure. We've all had that experience of misspelling something and wondering, well, what the heck was that again?
Thanks for having me on. It was a lot of fun, and I always appreciate you giving me the opportunity to join you.
Yeah, that's terrific. I'm just gonna sign out here. If you want to yell at me, I'm Isaiah, ISAIAH _520. Isaiah, don't forget that _520. And of course, you can follow the O&B Puckcast at O&B Puck, at O&B Puck on Twitter. We have a Facebook page. Please, if you can, give us a 5-star review, give us a rating on your favorite platform, particularly on Apple Podcasts and YouTube. You give us a subscribe there, or give us a follow, whatever applies, because it moves us up the charts when people are looking for Philadelphia Flyer podcasts, and that's important. And of course, it's always no charge. And with that, everybody, we'll talk to you next time. Take care.